Today on the Perception in Action podcast, are you crazy if you talk to yourself on the field or court? Or can it actually improve your performance? A look at the use of mantras and self-talk in sport. So it's time for a call to action. Hi everyone, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University and PerceptionAction.com. Welcome to the Perception in Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. In today's episode, a look at research examining the use of self-talk in sport. Before I get rolling, I'd like to thank listener Ellis Weinberger for the topic suggestion. If you have any ideas for topics you'd like to see covered on the podcast, please do drop me a line at robgray@asu.edu. Before digging into whether it actually works or not, let's look at some of the different types of self-talk that are used. There are a few different dimensions that have been identified. First off, what is the difference between a mantra and self-talk? Well, I would say that a mantra, which involves repeating a slogan or statement like smooth over and over again, is a specific type or subset of self-talk, which is a broader category that also includes everything from using short phrases to having full conversations with yourself. One key distinction that has been made is between positive and negative self-talk. Positive self-talk is obviously focused on good performance outcomes and/or is self-affirming. Things like, you can do it, or spin those pedals, if you're trying to achieve high cadence as a cyclist, for example. While negative self-talk can range from statements about avoiding bad outcomes, don't grind on those pedals, to expressions of anticipated failure, I'm not going to win this race. For outcome-based self-talk, pretty much anything can be phrased as either positive or negative. Not surprisingly, it's often proposed that positive self-talk will aid performance while negative will hurt it. We'll see whether this is the case or not shortly. Another dichotomy that has been used in this area is between instructional self-talk, which focuses on technical, tactical, or kinesthetic aspects of movement, and motivational self-talk, which is used to increase effort, enhance self-confidence, or create positive moods. Examples of instructional self-talk are things like elbow in baseball, or head down for golf putt. Examples of motivational self-talk are things like, you are a beast and you got this. It has been proposed that which of these two is better depends on the nature of the task being performed. In general, it is thought that instructional self-talk is better for highly technical skills that require a high degree of coordination, for example, making a tennis serve, while motivational self-talk is better for tasks that mainly involve strength or endurance, like weightlifting or running. Finally, in a model of self-talk developed by James Hardy and colleagues, it has been proposed that there are 4 different functions of self-talk use in sport. Cognitive, which is mainly related to a performer's attentional focus. For example, using self-talk to help maintain concentration and/or from keeping your attention from turning inwards. Second is motivational, which has a goal of helping to increase self-efficacy, that is the belief you can do something, and help persistence. Third is behavioral. For example, a novice performer might use self-talk to make sure they follow all the steps of the skill and do them in the correct order. Finally, there is affective self-talk, which is designed to keep your mood positive. Before moving on from definitions, a final factor that I want to mention that is brought up in relation to self-talk is skill level. It's often proposed that self-talk will be more beneficial for novices than experts. An example of this can be seen in the Hardy model I just mentioned. Because novice skill execution is less automatic, more conscious, and less encapsulated, it presumably can be guided more by self-talk. But we will see. So those are some of the different dimensions and definitions. What do I use personally? Well, I realized when preparing for this episode that it's kind of tricky to remember what you do in the heat of action. I encourage you to try it yourself. Focusing on running, for me, there are 2 instances I can think of I use self-talk regularly, and they are both in the same situation, running technical downhill trails. The first is actually an example of negative self-talk. When I'm nearing the end of a training run or the end of a race and I'm about to run a descent, I will frequently say to myself, no stupid mistakes. Meaning don't lose concentration, trip on a rock, fall and injure yourself after putting in all the good work to get here. If I do clip a toe and stumble, I will sometimes yell at myself, Rob, pay attention. The other phrase I use on descents is fast and light. This is an example of positive instructional self-talk as it refers to keeping a fast leg turnover and short ground contact time, both of which are things I know are important for fast descending. So if you see me talking to myself out on the trail, you'll know what I'm saying now. Okay, so we've defined it and categorized it. Let's dive into some research on whether or not self-talk works, and if so, which type is best. For this, I want to give a few examples of individual studies that have examined this topic, then move to some reviews and meta-analyses that have looked at the combined results of multiple studies. What we're really aiming for here is to answer two questions. First, does self-talk improve performance? And second, what variables moderate its effects? If you look into research in this area, it runs a gamut of types of methodology in sports science, from surveys, which ask to what extent self-talk is being used and how, to case studies, which look at self-talk for individual or small groups, to experimental studies, usually in a lab, which directly compare conditions in which self-talk is used with conditions in which it isn't. So I've tried to pick examples of all three of these. In a study published in the Journal of Applied Sports Psychology in 1999, Landon and Herbert investigated the effect of self-talk use for the improving volley shots in female tennis players. This was a case study of 5 members of a women's NCAA Division I team here in the US. One of the reasons I chose this particular study is that it used a design that can help overcome one of the main hurdles researchers face when doing applied work in the field: the lack of ability to have a true control group. Imagine you're a bright-eyed, enthusiastic researcher that approaches a coach and says, I had this great new method I think will help your athletes perform better called self-talk. I would like to try it, but I'm only going to let half of your athletes do it. Not an easy sell. To overcome this, the authors used what is called a single case, multiple baseline design. The key features of this design are that all participants receive the treatment or intervention, which will keep the coach happy. They just get it at different times. So for example, in this particular study, after 4 baseline sessions with no self-talk, player 1 began using it while the others did not. Players 2 and 3 started the self-talk intervention on day 6, while players 4 and 5 started it on day 7. What this allows the researcher to do is to separate improvements that result just from practicing alone, like you would see in a traditional control group, from improvements that are related to the intervention. So for example, if all players improve on day 5, but player 1, who got the intervention, improves a lot more, you can infer it had an effect. If you'd given the intervention to all the participants at the same time, you wouldn't know what any improvement was due to. But anyways, in this tennis study, participants used 2 words in the self-talk intervention. One was the word split, which was reference to keeping their feet split shoulder width apart, and the other was turn, as a reminder to turn the shoulders when making a volley. So this is an example of instructional self-talk, obviously. 2 dependent variables were measured: outcomes, that's the accuracy of the shot, and movement patterns. These were scoring of the video done by coaches. They looked at feet placement and shoulder turn. What was found? Overall, there were significant improvements in both of these variables after the self-talk intervention. Looking at the multiple baseline, for 3 out of 5 of the participants, there was a clear jump in performance after the intervention that does not appear to be the result of just practicing. For the other 2 participants, outcomes improved after the intervention, but there was no jump. Instead, it looks like they just continued to improve along the same performance trajectory they had in the baseline. So, from this study, it seems that self-talk does help performance, just maybe not for everyone.
The evening was so unreal. You You asked if my lips were sealed. I tried to talk, but my mouth just wouldn't move.
The second example study I wanted to mention was by Edwards and colleagues in 2008. It examined the effect of self-talk on the vertical jump ability of 24 rugby union players. The main goal of this study was to directly compare instructional versus motivational self-talk. Remember, it has been proposed that for a task that is primarily determined by strength, like a vertical jump, we would expect motivational self-talk to have a larger effect. This study employed a more experimental approach than the tennis one I just discussed. Specifically, a within-subjects design was used in which each participant performed vertical jumps under 3 conditions with the order counterbalanced. There was a no-intervention condition. There was a motivational self-talk condition which involved using the phrase, "I can jump higher." And finally, there was an instructional self-talk condition which involved using the phrase, "bend and drive." What was found? Consistent with the proposal I mentioned, motivational self-talk led to significantly greater displacement of the center of mass as compared to both other conditions. Both types of self-talk did lead to changes in jump kinematics, in particular hip displacement and rotational velocity, but for the instructional self-talk, this did not translate into better jumping performance. The final study I wanted to mention was a survey conducted by Van Rattel and colleagues in 2015, which examined self-talk usage in marathon runners. For this, a total of 483 runners were surveyed. 72 of them were elite, 2:25 or lower marathon time for men, 2:45 or lower for women, and the remaining 411 were non-elite. What was found? The vast majority of the runners, 88% to be exact, reported using some form of self-talk. For the elite runners, there was a tie for first place in terms of the most common types used. 43% of the elite runners used positive motivational self-talk, for example, "you can do it," and 43% used associative technical. This latter type refers to focusing on things like your pace, stride length, form, or cadence. For non-elites, positive motivational was by far the most common at 31%, with associative technical coming in second at 18%. Interestingly, non-elites used dissociative self-talk, for example, singing songs or counting steps, more than elites, while elites used negative motivational self-talk, for example, something like "don't be a wimp," more than non-elites. Finally, the use of mantras was fairly infrequent, with only 2% of non-elites and none of the elites using it.
Don't give up, think about a time when we're not waiting, can ticking and talking and taking time. Talking and ticking and talking lies all the time.
Okay, now that we've seen a few examples, let's look at the overall picture. In 2011, Todd and colleagues conducted a review of 47 self-talk studies. In terms of the positive versus negative self-talk distinction, a total of 16 studies used one or other of these. 75% of the studies using positive self-talk showed significant benefits on performance. All of the studies using negative self-talk showed no benefit. Note, however, they did not find that performance got worse with negative self-talk. There are actually only 5 studies that compared positive and negative head-to-head in the same group of participants. For these, 60% showed that positive self-talk is more beneficial for performance than negative. In looking at the instructional versus motivational dichotomy, there was strong evidence that both types of self-talk help performance, and that their dependency on the type of task being performed may not be as strong as has been proposed. For technical, fine motor skills, 80% of studies found benefits for instructional, while 67% of studies found benefits for motivational self-talk. For more gross motor skills, which rely on strength and endurance, 70% were improved by instructional self-talk and 83% were better with motivational. So the direction of the effects are as predicted, but the difference is not enormous. A couple final results. First, there are not really any studies that have been done which have directly compared the benefits of self-talk as a function of skill level. Second, there are some interesting findings when we look at the effect of self-talk on performance anxiety. It does seem to reduce cognitive anxiety, for example, worrying thoughts, but has no effect on somatic anxiety, which refers to more physical symptoms like butterflies in your stomach or trembling hands. In the same year of 2011, Hatzigiordatis and colleagues conducted a meta-analysis of self-talk research, looking at a total of 32 studies. The net result was a positive, moderate effect size of 0.48. In other words, self-talk seems to consistently help performance. In their analysis of moderating variables, it was found that self-talk interventions were more effective for tasks involving fine motor control than for tasks involving gross motor control, were more effective for novel tasks as compared to well-learned ones, and that overall instructional self-talk showed larger effects than motivational self-talk. So, to sum up, research shows that self-talk does have clear performance benefits. So keep talking to yourself out there. If, like me, you're using negative self-talk at all, you may want to consider rephrasing it as positive. And the type of phrases that will get the best results for you, for example, instructional ones that focus on technique as opposed to pure motivational ones, may depend on the nature of the task you're doing and your level of expertise with it. But the jury is still out on that. Speaking of juries, coming soon, the next edition of Perception and Action Court, the case of predictive versus prospective control. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or on Twitter at ShakyWeights. And to find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now.
Way.